Well, let's turn to our panel. Maryanne Marsh, Democratic strategist, and Lanhee Chen, Republican former domestic and foreign policy advisor to Governor Mitt Romney. And we're also joined, for the moment, by Neema Rahmani, who's a former US federal prosecutor and now president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. We'll start with you, Neema, since you're joining the panel, albeit briefly. We heard there from Neda. She took us through what happened today in the court. We've been hearing from people saying that it's quite typical for jurors to ask for certain key bits of evidence to be heard again. What did you read into the developments of the last 24 hours or so?
Rajini, Neda is absolutely right. It is typical for jurors to request a readback. And some of this is reading the tea leaves, but it's important to identify what that evidence is. And it's David Pecker. David Pecker was the prosecution's first witness for a reason. If you're the state, you always want to start strong. And he's an important witness because he directly connects Donald Trump to this catch and kill scheme. It seems like at least the jurors aren't focused on whether the business records were actually false. Let's not forget, the defense said that these were legitimate legal payments to Michael Cohen. It seems like they're past that, at least some of the jurors are, and now they're focused on intent and whether the false business records were in furtherance of or to cover up another crime. Because, of course, one of the interesting things of American law is each state has their own rules. And under New York law, just a misdemeanor if that cover-up or in furtherance is not proven. And, of course, New York also unique in that the jurors don't get those jury instructions in written form in the deliberation room. That's why any re-instruction has to happen in open court with the parties present.
I'll bring Neema back in before we get to you, Maryanne, because the other key witness was, of course, Michael Cohen. I remember when I was covering Trump back in 2016 onwards. I mean, he was often seen as one of the closest people to Donald Trump, who in the end turned on him.
No question, but the state does not want to rely on Michael Cohen because he's an admitted liar, a convicted felon, someone who has lied to Congress, the FEC. So what the state wants to do is corroborate his testimony with independent evidence. That's why we heard Neda talking about that recording, Trump's own voice, talking about the $150,000 payment to Karen McDougal. Alan Weisselberg, the CFO's notes, grossing up the reimbursement, getting it from a $130,000 to the $420,000 that was ultimately paid over $35,000 increments. That's what the state wants to focus on, because if this was a case about Michael Cohen alone, the prosecution loses.
Neema, I'm going to bring you in. We obviously heard closing arguments from both the prosecution and the defence this week before things wrapped up. As someone who works in this business, a former federal prosecutor as well, what was your assessment of how both the prosecution and the defence presented their arguments?
I was critical of both. I think the prosecution went far too long, almost 6 hours, which is really too long in a single defendant case. But I really take issue with the defense's strategy. They took the position that those business records were actually true. They were not false. They were legitimate legal expenses to Michael Cohen pursuant to a verbal agreement. The reason I had a problem with that is I think that really defies all logic and credibility. I thought what the defense should have done is what Todd Blanche said in his opening statement. He said that the defense was going to put on an accountant from the Trump organization to talk about these records. And I expected that witness to testify. That witness never did. And I expected the closing argument to say that Donald Trump, although he runs the entity, he's not involved in the day-to-day operations of the accounting and bookkeeping. And these entries were innocently but mistakenly booked as legal expenses, which they were not. I think the defense lost some credibility in their closing argument there.
OK, before I let you go, Neema, I want to ask all of you, actually, one question, just because it's fun. Neema, when do you think the jury's going to come back?
I think tomorrow afternoon is a very good guess. Jurors are ordinary people. They want to go home to their families, and approximately 50% of jury verdicts happen on Friday afternoon.
Okay.
And if you use a rule of thumb, jurors tend to deliberate approximately 1 hour for each day of witness testimony, and this was a 20-day trial. So those numbers end up lining up.
OK, Maryanne, what about you? When do you think?
I wouldn't argue with tomorrow afternoon at 5. However, given the stakes of this decision and everything that these jurors have been through, I think they'd rather get it right than get it done soon.
Lanny?
People want their weekends, I think, tomorrow afternoon.
OK, well, I'm on 24 hours from now, so yeah, we'll maybe be back with all of you tomorrow. Who knows? I'm not going to predict. Thank you very much, Nima Rahmani, and we'll be back with the rest of the panel later. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.